right. We are ready in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Arena Coop. This is ADWCTA.
Nope, wrong.
Damn it! Let's restart this. Okay, let's do it again. Let me get another drink of water. Three, 2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Hope all of you guys are doing well, adjusting to the new arena after the hotfix last Friday. And I think that's what we want to talk about, right? Like the state of arena. That's what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, especially because within 24 hours, all hell is going to break loose as the new expansion Witchwood cards are going to start rolling out again. So
yeah,
there's going to be a lot to talk about after this. I don't know if we're going back to 10.4 after this. I think we'll be pretty caught up in the Witchwood discussions. So this is it. This is the discussion of where things are, and it would really surprise me if Blizzard keeps touching this before the next expansion.
Right. I was just going to say, they hotfixed things on the 23rd, which was last Friday. And because of just the timeline of these leaks, or not leaks, like of the card
2
previews.
Fridays ago, not last Friday. 2 Fridays
right. So, and because of sort of the effects of like the card reveals, I think we're going to see the expansion in like about 3 weeks, right? Like approximately. That's what people have been estimating as well. So you're right. It would be kind of strange for them to make another change like a week from now, and then 2 weeks from that point, the expansion pops out and just like resets the meta anyways, right? So I think this is what we're dealing with. So it is appropriate for us to just sort of establish, okay, where are we and what were the implications of the hotfix?
Okay, so you want me to start with offering rates so we know what the rules of the game are, sort of?
Yeah, sure, let's do that.
All right, so first, I don't think anyone really has been talking about offering rates because people are either not looking on HS Replay or they're looking for themselves. No one's writing about it or making videos about it that I've seen. So here's the offering rates that exist currently in 10.4. Well, sort of. We don't really know the real offering rates. It's not following any specific system, but as you know, in 10.4, when it first came out, the offering rates were very tilted towards the best cards, and then they toned it down a bit in the hotfix. The big takeaway from the offering rates is that, one, everything's changed. So when Blizzard said things were going to be the same when it comes to spells, when it comes to minions, the spell bonus, when it comes to all the other stuff, basically things are going to remain the same. We're just going to allow the rarities to be seen together, and we're going to keep the tier scores the same. That's not true. That wasn't true the last time we talked about it. It was very obvious from when 10.4 launched that whole video when they were talking about that's just all fake news. So, not surprising, Blizzard gives fake arena news all the time. So let me tell you what's actually happening in the arena now when it comes to the offering rates. One, to the extent that there's any distinction between spells and minions based on more than the win rate and the selection of the cards, which is normally how they tier score the cards, assuming that Blizzard's coming to very similar tier score ratings that we have been, across the board, it seems like there's no more bonus to spells and weapons. And to the extent that there is, it's something like 20% rather than the plus 75% that it used to be. So that's right off the bat. This was a little masked in the short period before the hotfix because you got all the powerful cards all the time, and all the powerful cards are usually spells and weapons. But once they took that away, it's really apparent now in the meta. Initiative is much harder to find than it used to be. It's not as bad as before 7.4, before 7.1, before last year's major change, right? It's not as bad as it was in MSG. But you've definitely seen a slower, not slower, a less reactive kind of meta that's popped in, and that's the biggest reason for it. The biggest reason is that this spell and weapon bonus has either gone down dramatically or completely went away. Again, it's hard to know exact numbers because Blizzard doesn't give it to us, and the stats that we have don't there's not that much stats yet that you can make these like hard line like conclusions, especially over entire categories. So that's the first thing, and that's very meta defining. Right now, generally speaking, you should take whatever initiative cards you can get when Blizzard offers them to you. It'll serve you well, especially in classes without natural initiative, and especially if the initiative is not like double-sided, like if you can just like use it whenever. Okay, so that's one thing, probably the most important thing. The second thing is just randomly interesting, I think, but the epic offering rate has been halved, like almost exactly across the board.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so before, epics were offered at about half the rate as rares and commons. That's been the case since 7.1 last year, which is around like, that came out, I think, like March. That came out for the month of March. So it's been the same since then. But since the system has changed, it is now 25% of what a rare or common will be offered to you at. So
this is regardless of how good the card is, just epics in general.
Like general, again, like there's no lines anymore. Like, so you can't make that statement. Like, that's just not a true statement, and it will never be a true statement no matter what Blizzard does to it. I just mean generally, before the micro adjust, before the adjustments for how good a card is, before all that stuff. So like, if you were seeing like Psychic Scream I can actually look up Psychic Scream right now. But I'm just going to use it as an example. And that's like top of the list. So that should be seen more often than the other cards, right? Because the weighing now of card offering rates is way towards the higher cards. It used to be seen 7.6%. Now it's seen 2%. And
wow.
Keep in mind, part of that has to do with the removal of the offering bonus. Wait, is Psychic Scream in KNC?
I think so.
Okay, because they did remove the KNC offering bonus too, so that's going to affect it a little, but it's not going to knock it down from 7% of decks to 2% of decks.
Yeah.
And when I say offering rates, I don't really mean offering rates, I mean the rate that you will pick the card in your deck. Because you can't find offerings anymore, not with HS replay data anyway. So we don't know how much it'll be offered to you, but presumably when you're offered a Psychic Scream, you're going to take it most of the time, and it ends up being seen. It used to be seen in 7% of decks, now it's seen in 2% of decks.
That's a huge, huge difference.
Yeah. And that 7% was already knocked down from the initial when the game, like when KNC launched. Because when KNC launched, Psychic Scream didn't have a penalty. Remember? And then they added a penalty to Psychic Stream sometime in January. And I can only see data from January onwards. So it used to be even higher.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of epics. Other epic cards are going to do even worse. What's like a totally normal epic card that I can search up right now?
Blood Knight.
Blood Knight. Actually, Blood Knight, I think, is one of the outliers. Because you see it a lot, because it's offered against a weaker pool. So that's the other thing, right? Like, because offerings are generally now in sets, if you are on the top end of a set, you're just going to be picked more than if you're on the bottom end of a set.
Okay, how about Feltwork Soulfiend?
But just to give you Blood Knight statistics, it used to be 2.5%, now it's 1.2%. So even Blood Knight is kind of fitting the trend that we're seeing.
Interesting.
Yeah, Feltwork Soulfiend.
Yeah, Feltwork Soulfiend.
Again, this could be, like, you know, Feltwork Soulfiend actually moved down less. Because I know this. Feltwork Soulfiend is offered, like, it's usually one of the stronger cards in the sets it's offered in. I found myself taking this fairly frequently now. I think it's because its win rate is lower than it should be because people, like, play with it wrong or something. I don't know. But it's gone from 2.5% to 1.9%.
Okay, so still a decrease.
Yeah, it's still a decrease, not halved, but that's one of the stronger cards within the set. So again, like, you can tell from this conversation about offering odds right now and like about selection odds, it's really hard to have like to make actual statements anymore. Because everything's fuzz and we don't know the rules of the game, and Blizzard does not tell us the rules of the game, and whatever rules of the game Blizzard has told us are like definitively wrong. Like, everything Blizzard's told us, or maybe not everything, but a large portion of what Blizzard's told us about how offering odds work, to the extent they gave us any clues, are provably incorrect.
Right. And this is not something new. We've established this like previously, right? But yeah, I mean, this is good to know. Like, if you are trying to play this game competitively, if you are trying to just either go for the leaderboard or just maximize your gold, right? Or you just want to win generally. This is important information. Like, this is information that does give you a better view of the meta. It gives you a leg up on people that don't know it.
Yeah, have you seen Doom around? After
No.
10.4? No, you haven't, because it went from 2.9% to 1.2%. Like, you just don't see these cards around. These are the epic cards that you used to play around. And I don't even want to start on Carnivorous Cube. Like, I don't know what Blizzard did to Carnivorous Cube, but I don't even see it being offered to me. Like, can you remember a time when you were offered Carnivorous Cube?
Right. So what's the rate right now?
It used to be 13%. It
Wow.
is now
Okay.
3.6%. From 13% to 3.6%.
Damn.
It died. So
Yeah.
I don't know if Blizzard's doing something special to the card, or if it's like just being offered all the time against the absolute top tier card, so it's never picked. But these are things that happen, and they affect the meta. This is what the meta is. The meta is what cards people pick. And before, we used to have a good idea about what cards are offered. Now, we don't have a good idea about what cards are offered. So even if Carnivorous Cube is seen the same amount of time as other epic cards, because of the grouping of where it is, it'll be actually in the game a lot less frequently.
Right.
And again, these are just like not things you would know. You need to gather like a lot of stats for it. And as a player, in this meta, there's just no way you would know the rates for all these cards, unless you like search and memorize every one of them.
Right. And the rate is important. So number one, we're talking about the rate that a card appears in the deck, but right now that is so tied with the buckets that these cards are offered in, right? And this is something that players have tried to figure out, and some people have already posted, or they figured out some buckets, right? Like, I know Taro posted something on Arena HS talking about he's figured out some of the rogue buckets, right?
Yep.
I think it was like rogue and paladin. And this is also important just because whenever you see a card that is picked very often or not very often, and it ends in decks very often or not very often, there's a couple of factors that pulls it in that way, right? Like, is it not appearing in decks because it is just like scored incorrectly, right? And it's put into a bucket in which it is just not competitive at all? Or is it because it is being put into a lower bucket that just doesn't appear as often?
Yep.
So even when you see it and you pick it, it doesn't appear. So this is all sort of these X factors that go into the appearance rate in decks that we just still need to figure out. And it's huge. Like, it impacts what you see, and it impacts sort of like what you should expect. So this is something that we like, I don't know it. Do you know it right now?
Know what?
Like, all of this.
Oh, all of it? No, not even close.
Right?
And you can't extrapolate against a lot of these. Like, I'm gonna take Ultimate Infestation as one of those like epic cards that should be picked literally every single time you see it. It should be picked, and its offering rate has stayed stable, or its rate seen in games has remained stable. And compare that to something like Spike Rich Steed, which I think for some reason people pick every time it's offered, even though they shouldn't. Like, I think people like it better than Mind Cleaver for whatever reason. Steed's rate has doubled, whereas Ultimate Infestation has stayed the same. And these are the top line items. So, generally speaking, for most top line just like cards, it's remained stable if you're a common or a rare, and it has gone up if it has halved its rate if it's an epic. But you can make up for it by approximately plus 100% if you are the favorite, right? If there's a distinct reason to pick you every time, for whether because it's people's preferences or because you're actually just way better than the other cards it's offered. On the other hand, you don't see this pattern in something like Mage, because there are so many top cards. Like, there's no card that's, we will pick this every single time. because there's so many. But it's very unlike Ultimate Infestation with Druid, which you really wouldn't pick anything else. The closest one for Mage is Epic for Meteor, and that one again, it showed very little drop in offering rate because a Meteor is about as close to Ultimate Infestation as you can get from another class. But if you take something like a Firelance Portal or something, even those have shown that it hasn't doubled, even though it was a common card.
Yeah. So this is one of those things where, look, I still appreciate Blizzard following up on this philosophy of making drafts matter. I also appreciate Blizzard reacting so quickly to just get out of what I'm going to call the Lich King meta, right? And I think that's a fair name for that.
And I'll add this: it's no longer the Lich King meta, but Lich King offering rates are still up plus 50% compared to KNC. So they haven't pulled back all the legendary changes. They've pulled back a lot of it, but the Lich King hasn't gone all the way back.
Yeah, and I think that's fine, right?
Yeah,
and it
that's
increased
fine.
to 50% on the original.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, because it used to be super rare. So that's fine. But yeah, we are in the post Lich King meta. And right now it's like information is so vital now. And there's more information that you need to know in order to get an advantage. But we don't know so much, right? And I find that when I draft, I'm very cognizant of what I don't know, and it is very frustrating.
Yeah, if you're drafting and you're like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing, that means you're not thinking about the draft at a very high level. It means you don't know what you don't know, right? Whereas the good players all feel a little shaky, when they're doing their drafts or their gameplays, and a lot of them have complained about the new meta. We'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, so this is the wrap up of the offering rates discussion, or offering rates and scene rates, so you can know what the meta actually looks like in terms of how often these cards are going to show up. So if you're looking at these and you're thinking well, Steed gets doubled, Firelance Portal looks to be also increased a little bit, or at least about the same. So if all these really good high initiative cards are showing up as much, if not more than how they used to show up, why are you saying that the meta has less initiative, right? That shouldn't be the case. If you took all the old cards that have an initiative and are really good, and you kept them stable or even increased them, that should be more initiative, if anything. So what's happened instead is that the mid-range initiative cards, we're talking about your not so good cards that still have initiative, not bad cards, but just they're okay. They either have a drawback or they're 4 mana for 4 damage or something. They have are the ones that have gone down. So when the mid-range and the bottom kind of falls out, as these drafting odds are doing, you are seeing the same amount of top-end cards as you did in KNC, but with a distinct lack of this middle zone.
I see. So and this might not be an exact card, but sort of the Flame Geyser-esque cards.
Flame Geyser is probably pretty better than that. We're talking lower than that.
Okay.
Something like Demon Fire, right?
Demon
For
Fire,
example, has gone down by 25%, something like that. And it's a lot of these cards that have gone down.
Right, and those are cards that people don't notice as much because you sort of hang your hat on a draft with Firelance Portals and Meteors, but you do forget about those small cards in which they bail you out, right? Sometimes you just really need that initiative to kill that 6/2 minion that's behind a taunt. And if you don't kill that on that turn, you lose way too much health, or they get such a good trade.
Yeah.
And yeah, cards like that are I definitely feel in my last few runs that I have made mistakes by sort of not valuing initiative correctly, right? Or
you're using it to get tempo, whereas you should be saving it to not lose the game when your opponent plays card X.
Right, and then I'm just oh wait, I used a Frostbolt on turn 2, and I'm I really needed that Frostbolt.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, and I think people have caught on to that as well, and they feel more comfortable sort of going with something like not going all in, but they feel more comfortable like dropping like let's say Grime Street Enforcer, right? Like
Hmm.
on an empty board and knowing that it's like, hey, your chances of being able to respond to this are really little. And if I have 2 turns with the Enforcer out, I'm probably gonna win the game,
Yeah.
right?
I will also say that we're speaking of these offering odds as if they were somehow consistent and following some sort of rules. Like I'll give you things like, well, epic cards are about halved of what they're usually offered at, but like, or like how, of what those of what you'll see in each deck, right? They're usually about half. But that's not applicable to every card. There are cards that just for no reason Blizzard is just offering much more to people. And if you played a lot of arena runs, you'll know. Like one of the ones I'm looking at right now, and I'll point out, and there's a lot more of these. I can't list all of them because I don't know all of them. But like Lava Burst, like we'll talk about Shamans and Warriors afterwards. But Lava Burst is one of those like this is not a terribly great card. It's effectively 5 mana for 5 damage, right? It's like it's a okay kind of initiative card. It used to be seen at around 1 to 1.2%. So called 1.1% of decks. And now it's seen at 3.5% of decks. So part of
Wow.
that is that people, and you'll know if you draft Shaman, it's getting like presented to you all the freaking time. It's like you can get 5 Lava Bursts in a deck pretty easily if you wanted to. And the other part of it is that you're seeing Shamans more now, which also makes this rise up significantly. Okay, so let's move on to between like getting away from what cards you see in a draft to what the meta is like now in terms of classes. And here's where it's interesting. And the class composition that you actually see may not be terribly different than anything else. It's not a very dominated meta. You'll see a lot of classes pretty evenly, I think. Like I feel like it's very balanced in terms of what people are choosing to use, right? Where it is not balanced, where it is actually like I think like fairly unbalanced is in terms of the win rates. And you can see that like if you look at HS Replay's win rates, this is something that I don't think anyone can predict because again, remember before 10.4 hit, we were like we can't predict anything about the meta because we don't know what's happening because Blizzard won't tell us. And the few things we could have gone on, it turns out we're all wrong because Blizzard gave us fake news. So now, right now in the current meta, your number one win rate for the average player who uses who has their stats uploaded to HS Replay in the arena is Shaman at 53.14%. And number two, very, very, very close, is Warrior at
Ooh.
52.88%. Third place is a little farther behind, which is Paladin at 51.74. And then fourth place is even farther behind, which is Rogue at 50.7%. So distinct favorites are Shaman and Warrior, basically side by side in terms of win rates. And again, these are not easy classes to play, all right? So if the average player is doing so well with, well, Shaman's kind of like different because it's not an easy class to play, but then there's a lot of randomness, so it kind of washes out. But Warrior is definitely not an easy class to play. But yeah, they are ruling the meta right now. What do you think about that, Merps?
You know, first of all, look, this is something that people I think if you told people what would you think about shamans and warriors being on top of the arena, I think a lot of people would be like, hey, that's cool, right? Like, because we don't have that very
Mm-hmm.
often, especially warriors is number two. Come on. Like, I think a lot of people would be happy about it. But once again, it's like, how did they reach there, right? And it's in order to analyze how a class is really high now. Like, how do we analyze it before? It was always sort of like, okay, what were the offering rates of cards and how good were those cards, right? But now there's an additional layer to it. It's like, well, in order for these classes to be that high, it's like you also have to look at the buckets now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the and you might know exactly like what the answer is, but sort of one of the guesses as to sort of why Shaman has been so good is just because their buckets don't get in each other's ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one thing we've seen a lot is like I faced a lot of Jade Shamans. And Jade Shamans are very doable now. And it seems as though, once again, let me know if you know the exact answer. It seems as though it's like, if we have like the S tier bucket, you have like Jade Claws, and then you have in a separate bucket Jade Lightning, and in a separate bucket, like the Jades don't get in each other's ways. So it's like it's like cheating on synergy picks, right?
Yes.
It's like you're going to get it. So it's like there is no downside to picking this because on average, I not only will hit the like necessary amount of J's, I'm going to surpass it by far to make it worth it. So a car that was originally very good, Jade Claws and Jade Lightning, you're going to get so many of those. It's like I have myself made like a 6 Jade deck, and I've seen like people beat me with like a 6/6 Jade before they've even drawn half of their deck, right? So I'm just like, okay, Jade is very doable now. And if you want to talk about the Warrior, I think it's just Warriors have always had really good cards, and weapons have always been like ultimate value plus really good tempo, right? But they were always sort of hurt by the fact that when you just do micro adjust, they get offered too many weapons, right? And then you're easily over weaponed. And you're just like, well, it's 10 cards in. Am I going to pick the second Gorehowl? I can't. But now, whenever there's a good pick, even if you don't want the Gorehowl, well, it's going to go up against like a Primordial Drake then, right? Or something. I don't know if that's the exact same bucket, but so you can get all of the weapons and you can get all of the general good cards, and you're always able to walk that line and say like, okay, I'm able to get like the 6 weapons that I want, right? And I can grab those weapons without sacrificing any goodness, because instead of the Gorehowl, I will pick the Frothing Berserker, I'll pick the Primordial Drake. And this is me just like, I have no idea what the buckets are.
Yeah, and I think that's the key for the Warrior, is every time you're thinking, oh, I may over weapon, you have a Frothing Berserker to fall back on, right? You have a Ravaging Ghoul to fall back on. And that is so clutch. And that's also why these are, like, Frothing Berserker numbers are through the freaking roof in terms of how many of them you see in the game. You used to, like, see less than 1% of decks with them. And now, between the Warrior getting more popular and just that's a very good card, you see, like, 4%. Like, that's risen. Compare that to, let's say, Fool's Bane, which you used to see 1%, and now you see 3%.
Damn.
Yeah. So people are picking more Frothing Berserkers than Fool's Banes. And the reason for that is because at some point you're going to over-weapon, or you may over-weapon, and so you fall back to the Frothing Berserker. Whereas there's much fewer chances where you're like, oh, I'm in dire need of more weapons. I'm going to forego a Frothing Berserker and take a Fool's Bane. So yeah, like this is what's happening. And I think the one point that you haven't brought up that I don't think we should gloss over is the fact that the special cards that have been added in this meta, the arena only cards for Shaman and Warrior, are like way better than the other classes. None of the other classes go over 150, which is my standard for this card should not exist. So none of the other cards have a tier list score going above 150, except for Warrior and Shaman, and both of those cards are like close to 300. Like they're utterly ridiculous cards that should not come close to existing. Like Blazing Longsword's at 283. 283. You know what a Gorehowl is?
Not 283.
185.
I mean, it makes sense. Like if you look at something like a power shot, for example, right, and how good that is, Blazing Longsword, it's a persistent power shot essentially. Like it takes up your weapon slot, and yeah, you take face damage as well. It's an AoE given to a class that doesn't really have AoE, and it's so much value.
Yeah.
That card just like it just wrecks. Like I don't know what you're supposed to do against it, because if you try to play around it by just playing one minion, like Warriors can definitely get rid of one minion, right? Or any class can deal, like whoever you are.
Unless you're a druid.
Unless you're a druid. Or even if you're like, as a player in general, you're more worried generally about complex boards, right?
Yeah.
Varied boards, than just one, like if they just on turn 4 put down a Yeti, turn 5 put down like a Pit Fighter, right? Turn 6 put down a Boulderfist Ogre. You don't like, you should be totally fine with that, because that should be the like bottom baseline. And if they keep on playing the bottom baseline, you're okay with it. And Blazing Longsword just sort of like deals with their, on that turn, it's already like more than you need with the mana. And then on the next 2 turns, you just have like a mini consecration, like
whenever,
ready to go.
Like you can just save it, or you can just like use it to deal 2 damage twice. Like it doesn't matter. You can even go face. Like it's just, it's a ridiculous card. If you look at win rates, Blazing Longsword's deck win rate is 62%. Compare that to Fool's Bane or N'Zoth's First Mate, which are both at 59.5. That's like a 1.5% higher win rate in the average deck for like having the card in your deck. Like that's a crazy, crazy difference.
Right, and we're comparing it with 2 of like the winningest cards.
Yeah.
In Hearthstone.
Exactly. You know what happens when you drop Fool's Bane by 1.5% again? You get Upgrade.
Which
Commanding Shout, Battle Rage, Forge of Souls. Like, those are fine cards, right? Grimy Gadgeteer, Arcanite Reaper, Bloodrazor. Like, no one's doubting the power of those cards. But you go from, like, a good card to, like, a premium, like, you know, Fool's Bane or N'Zoth's First Mate. And then you have to go one more level to get to Blazing Longsword. Like,
right.
It skews the arena. And I think Blizzard, by making these cards, and the people selecting these cards, they knew at BlizzCon to see which cards go, and they knew that Warrior needed a really good card, so they gave Warrior a really good card. They knew Shaman needed a really good card, so they did that. And remember, microadjusts are still in play, probably. We have no idea. So they're probably all, like, all the Shaman cards and Warrior cards are probably still being microadjusted up based on classes. Which brings me to like a point that I kind of want to make clear about this new offering system and how it's working with microadjusts. It's pointless. Like, the point of microadjusts is kind of like class balance or whatever now, right? But once you have all of your offering rates at offering like cards at the same tier, you've cut down a lot of the class imbalance. And in areas where you have like too much of a thumb on the scale, it actually like has a counter effect. So I don't think Blizzard has adjusted microadjust for the 10.4 system yet. And I think once they do make that adjustment, it's going to be a much lower number than it was before, which is great because to the extent that there should be any microadjust for classes, it should be as small as possible because no one can figure that crap out. We've had it for like almost an entire year at this point.
Yeah, it definitely seems like something in which, like, you don't want a machine that's too complex, right? Because it's difficult for people to understand. And at the same time, it's just like, it's inelegant, right? Yeah. And for a game like this, you want elegance in your rules. And we're talking about rules here, right? Like, the best games in the world, and like just generally, are like simple to understand, but hard to master.
Yeah, like chess. Right, like Go.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and obviously during these card, like you're going to have more complex rules, but with this, you know, when you layer these sort of buckets with micro adjust, it just turns into this like really, it's like one of those like huge contraptions that takes like 20 minutes just to crack open an egg, right? It's like, why have that? And it doesn't even look as cool as that machine.
But like, it's fine if no one ever has to see the machine or do anything with the machine. But when you put it in a competitive game and how you win the game is starting to be more based like on whether you understand this really complicated contraption, and then you put it behind a wall so no one can see it, and we're all just kind of guessing at what the contraption is, like, you know, that's on the other side. You're just testing a really weird skill right now for a card game.
Right, and I think even before they did like microadjust, even when we were saying it's like, how can they do balance? It's like, we mentioned this sort of bucket system, right? Like,
and they used the bucket system for the cards, which actually I think, like, especially if microadjusts are kind of on a bucket system too. Like,
kind of,
they're kind of on a bucket system. They're not really like independent from a bucket system, but they have gone with the bucket system definitely for 10.4. It seems from the stats that Taro's been pulling up. So. You know, microadjust will probably go the same way. It hasn't happened yet, But I imagine that with the new cards coming out, that's what's going to like. That's one of the things that are going to happen is update the micro adjust. Which brings me to another point about this warrior and shaman meta. So I know we're not talking about like how to beat a warrior or how to beat a shaman, but like I don't know, just like watch out for the same things you would normally watch out. It's actually not that hard to beat a warrior or a shaman. My win rate against warriors are still super high. I think the problem really is people have no idea how to deal with a warrior because they're so not used to seeing warriors. So if you are a warrior, your opponents do a lot of dumb things. But like generally against a warrior, just like tempo. Don't put too many things at one health at the same time, you know? But putting like one thing is totally the right play to do, even if it ends up getting pinged. But otherwise, just like play a lot of stuff, have a lot of stuff. Make sure to position stuff now if you have like, you know, for the blazing longswords, and I get totally screwed by that. But it's not that hard to beat a warrior.
No, and I would say, you know, some of the philosophies that you have used against warlocks, like traditional warlocks, right? You want to apply that to warriors now.
I
Like,
think that's fair.
because previously it's like, how did you beat a warrior? And it was like, well, like obviously, like you didn't need to do much. It's like just play, right? And previously, you didn't have to go face as much against warrior because you knew that overall deck quality, like unless they had the perfect deck, and chances are very slim that they had it, you could just beat the warrior by grinding them out, right? And making sure that they are not like, because you know that their deck is probably less flexible and their deck quality is probably lower, right? So you can grind them out. And I think a lot of people got used to that mentality. But the difference in the new warriors is just their deck quality is good, and their deck quality is good, like so good with the fact that they have like the right number of weapons, right?
And keep in mind, weapons, people don't think of it like this, but weapons are card advantage. Each weapon kills like 2 cards, right? And that's the same thing with shamans, and they're like all the board clears. They're all card advantage. So if you're trying to win a card advantage game against a warrior, you're actually probably going to lose, even if you have 2 arcane intellects or like a Kabbalah's Tome or whatever. And you're like, haha, I'm mage, I'll win the card advantage game. Maybe, but also maybe not. It's no longer guaranteed. So, you know, like don't like think of it that way. Instead, just like put your stuff on the board. The warriors have trouble getting rid of a lot of stuff on the board when they're all at medium health, right? Like that's not their strong suit.
And just like how you hit a warlock's face to reduce their card advantage, if the more tempo you get earlier on and the more you're able to pressure the warrior, the less value they get out of their weapons. Also, the more defensively they have to play, right? Warriors play much better when they are on the offense, when they can proactively use that execute on your minion in order to go face, right? And then forcing you to play defensively. If you are just getting out there and like, because execute is an awkward card, right? Like that is an awkward card.
I don't even care about execute. I have my big minions executed all the time against warriors. It doesn't matter. I still beat them.
Exactly. Like when you have the initiative, you render a lot of the premium warrior cards not as good. A lot of their weapons, you know, executes because they can't like easily ping, right? Or like even if they do that, you know, you're still able to go face and just like reduce their advantage. Now, it's not easy to do. It's not as easy to beat a warrior now because of their deck quality, right? But it is sort of
the strategy is pretty simple. Like I don't think people use that strategy. I think people like still pretend that like they're just gonna be fine playing a nice normal mid-rangey game. Like I see people anti-tempo against the warriors sometimes, and I'm like, what are you doing? What are you afraid of? Like, what's your end game here?
Right, and it's also because it's like when you play slow against a warrior, not only can they out-tempo you, at any given point, they can flip and suddenly deal like 15 damage to your face, right? So that's like just really dangerous there. Warriors, whenever you allow them to pressure you, it's really hard to come back because they can consistently put pressure on you. They have the charge minions, they have the removals, they have their weapons. And yeah, I think part of this is just because like how to play against a warrior has changed at like so dramatically. A lot of people are just caught off guard by like the quality of their decks now.
Yeah, I'll give you one more thing about warriors in this meta, which is Reckless Flurry is seen not a ton on warriors in the low win rates, but once you get to the high win rates, Reckless Flurry is everywhere. Why? Because it's one of the easiest ways to cheat out like against your set offerings, because it's not a very high win rate card, because people don't use it correctly, but good players know how to use it. And like, watch out for that against high warrior decks, because first of all, the deck is probably pretty good to begin with. Second, there's probably some synergies with armor. And how do you deal with Reckless Flurry besides like don't commit too hard? Which again, like I said, you can't not commit against a warrior, so you kind of have to play into Reckless Flurries. Well, you do it by hitting their face instead of their minions, so they can't build up that armor. Like, Reckless Flurry is not a great card if you play the armor on the same turn and then play Reckless Flurry. Like, it's still pretty anti-tempo.
Right.
But if they can build up some armor, like have 4 armor to start, and then the next turn they have the choice of using 3 mana to deal 4 damage to everything, or to use 5 mana to deal 6 damage to everything, well, then you're screwed. So, like, hit their face, right? Have the board and hit their face over clearing their minions oftentimes, if you think that Reckless Flurry is one of the ways that they'll be able to get back. And I keep getting crap about it because I pick Reckless Flurry really high. We rate it like as one of the top like non-weapon warrior cards. It's like 158. Like, it's insane. It beats out a Arathi Weaponsmith on our rating system, and I stand by that. Both of my 12 warriors have had 2 Reckless Flurries in the KNC meta. It's just an insane card used in the right hands, and they didn't have like that many synergies attached to it either. It's just like, you can armor up the turn before, and then you're set for the next turn if they don't hit your face. You generally know whether your opponent is in a position to hit your face or not. And so, generally speaking, you do these things, and your opponent is totally unprepared for these kind of like ward cleary stuff. It worked even better before there was the longsword, because now they're kind of worried about you dealing 2 damage to everything. But still, it's one of those insanely good cards that it will be continuously underrated because most players are really bad with it. But at high win rates, watch out for that, because the warriors who are there, like, so many of them use the same thing that like they know.
Right. So, and you can see some similarities between like the warrior and shaman and why they have such high win rates. And part of it is because they sort of box you into these situations in which you know that they have cards that can deal with sort of like all 3 of your options, right? So like, you know, we talked about a lot with the warrior, but let's go to shaman, right? It's like, you know that they have ways to deal with single target removal, right? Between Hex and Crushing Hand. But now they have like 2 forms of really ridiculously powerful AoE as well. They've had Volcano, but with Crackling Doom as well, you're just like, I can't play, like, how do you play around it, right? Maybe you have a Death Rattle, but like, you know, you still aren't able to put like an entire
And the worst part about it is defensive shaman's gonna hero power every turn, and you're gonna have to clear that totem every turn, so you can't even deal damage to its face, so it gets like as many turns as it freaking wants to.
Right. So are you going to tempo out? Well, if you tempo out, you can get really punished by a Crackling Doom, and they still get to play minions after the Crackling Doom, right? But if you don't play out, that's when shamans can really just sort of start setting up, right? And then they, you know, after they do a lot of totems, they can buff those totems. They can do like annoying evolve stuff, right, as well.
Or they're just totems. They're just annoying by themselves. Like, totems by themselves will kill you if you give them like healing totems, a taunt totem at will, like, you know, the spell damage totems, now that they have more spell damage stuff.
Right. So these are classes in which I find, like, especially versus shaman, right? Like, when I'm facing shaman, I'm just
shaman is way more horrible to face than warrior.
Right. I think with warrior, it is people just not getting used to facing warrior. With shaman, I'm just like, all right, well, I have a feeling this person might have a Crackling Doom or a Volcano, and they play similarly, right, when they have those. I'm like, well, I could, I guess, slow down a little bit, but if I slow down, like, sometimes my deck isn't made for that, or sometimes I'm just like, I can't really do much of anything. It's like, he definitely wins if I slow down.
Yeah, you can't slow down because he has totems. You need to keep clearing totems every turn.
Yeah.
So it's rough.
Yep.
But yeah, so that's the particular meta for Shaman and Warriors. I know it's not like a lot of good help against Shamans, but there's really not that much you can do against a Shaman. Just like hope they don't have it is really where I'm coming down at.
Make the appropriate reads, and I'm not. And part of what makes them powerful is even though you make the read, sometimes you can't do anything about it. But make reads, because I see a lot of Shaman players, they really try to greed out these removals, right? It's like totem on 2, totem on 3, on turn 4 they'll like loot hoarder totem, right? I'm like, okay, well, you have one of the big AoEs, otherwise you wouldn't just like do that. And then it's sort of like, okay, now it's time to start counting my damage, number 1, right? Number 2, just like really thinking about my turns. And sometimes I can't do anything about it, but in one out of like, or every other game, I can do something to just make my next couple of turns a little bit more optimal, knowing that he has that big AoE, right?
Yep.
So that's something I encourage people to do. And other than that, it's like if they play Crackling Doom and then they play a Volcano after you try to reload, I guess you just lose. If they play double Crackling Doom, I guess you just lose as well.
And they'll always have the chance to draft 3 Crackling Dooms because of how the drafts work, if they wanted it.
Yeah.
Although, like, Crackling Dooms are not as good after the first one. So the first one's a must pick. After that, it's like, the other things could be better than it. Yeah. But, yeah. So, what else? What else to tell you about this new meta? Curve-wise, you don't need 2s. You can get 2s now. It is now definitely possible to get 2s. So the deck diversity in terms of archetypes has gone up. But having a lot of 2s is not terribly important for most classes, especially classes that already have a ping. So you may not want to go too heavy in that side. Like, aggro doesn't really work too well. You see the hunter win rates at a pathetic 45%. Part of it is because of microadjust, but part of it is also because it's just a bad meta for it. Like, it's not a bad meta for, like, faster mid-range decks, but it's a bad meta for aggro decks. So think hard about that before you go down that road. I drafted a very fast warlock that did not do well at all. It's just one of those metas where you actually need the mid-range minions to really hold you. On the flip side, control, depending on how your draft goes, can do well or it can kind of backfire. So I think this is a very like mid-rangey kind of meta.
Yep, agreed.
All right, you want to talk a little about, I don't know, what we can do, like, or what Blizzard should do, or just general post 10.4 things?
Yeah, sure. So I think because of these changes, some people have had pretty strong opinions, right, on 10.4 and also the hot fix after 10.4. And we've sort of seen how some of the big arena players and streamers have reacted to these changes. And recently, like, I know Kibler tweeted out that he was, and he's been playing Arena quite a bit, right? And I understand he really liked 10.4, and he was kind of disappointed in the hot fix. He just thinks that the overall deck quality has gone down way too much.
It is lower than KNC right now, definitely.
Yeah. And Hafu tweeted out just yesterday, so this was on Saturday. And she basically says, Arena feels so bad once again. Love the initial changes. Can't stand playing the game now. Losing to the draft and not the player is so infuriating. 1 step forwards and 2 step backwards for Arena. And I think generally, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think Amaz also agrees with this sentiment. So we have a camp of players who, see the hot fix and they see this like huge swing the other way, right? And they're not as happy. On this thread, Crip replied, and he, I think feels very differently. He says, I think it's great. I feel a lot of the time we are losing to weak old decks, and he's referring to
like that period, the 3-day 10.4.
The Lich King meta.
Yeah, the Lich King meta.
And he goes on to say, when I go north of 6 wins, it really feels like I'm often up against the type of decks I drafted last week, which in terms of Crip, that's probably very, very true.
It's probably literally true for every single game.
I'm pretty sure like 50% of decks that he faces over that are just like people. It's like, yes, double Lich King, triple Firelance Portal, let's go. Yeah. So I think in Crip's view, he sort of shares our sentiment in that like there's an overall net positive, right? And yes, there are still kinks to be worked out, but in general, I think he likes the direction that it's going.
Okay, I want to
And
make a thing about the other people's responses. It's not necessarily that the hotfix was the problem. It's more that the hotfix has brought to light problems that existed even in the 10.4
I
prior
agree.
meta, or even just like generally beforehand. Like one of Hopf's complaints, oddly, was like, "Oh, the deck is determinative of like your success, not the actual gameplay." And I'm like, that was the case always in terms of Hearthstone. It hasn't gotten worse.
It's been one of our complaints for quite a while.
Yeah, like it's
Right?
not like this is a new issue. It's not like it's an issue that's gotten significantly worse. If anything, it's gotten better since 10.4's initial period, I think. But like I don't know. A lot of these things are. It depends on how you look at it, but it also you have to. I don't think you're doing them justice when you simplify the arguments to things like they don't like this meta or like they don't like the post hotfix. It's like why? What are the reasons? Right? A lot of this is not issues with the hotfix or even with 10.4. A lot of it is just issues with the arena because guess who did not like arena before 10.4?
Right. That
Hafu.
is true.
Like that's what we had her on the Lightforge, like basically saying how bad arena's gotten and how she's quit. And now this is like kind of a similar-ish like vibe that I'm getting, which is not so much that the hotfix is the problem or 10.4 made things so much worse, but rather that like 10.4 made things really exciting for a brief period of time, and now that's gone, and all the old problems are still here, or like enough of the old problems are still here. That's still very problematic.
Yeah, I think that is true. And that's a point I definitely agree with as well. It's like if the problem is variance in overall deck quality,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's something that we've had for quite a while, right? And
And they can fix it now. We talked about this in the last Lightforge. Blizzard, with a
right.
push of a button, can fix that entire problem, and they have just chosen not to.
And I think part of what sort of contributes to this feeling that I think I'll say people in sort of the Hafu, Amaz, and
Mm-hmm.
Kibor camp feel is that the draft does feel bad as you're doing it. And by that, I mean, whether you have a good pick or a bad pick, you always feel bad. Because when you have a bad pick, it's like Amgam Rager versus Wisp
Mm-hmm.
and you're just like, wow, this feels terrible, right? It's like I am looking at my overall deck quality go down dramatically,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I'm looking at that. And whenever you have a really good pick, you have that like, oh, I need to get rid of two of these.
Yeah.
And even like me, and I think both of us are pretty sort of like, just sort of like we try to be as logical about this as possible, right? Whenever I draft, I am also very aware. I'm just like after the draft, I just like I have this like bad. It's like after all of the picks, I definitely feel bad,
Well, I
right?
think
And
you
this
feel
bad,
bad also because the power level's just gone down. You like literally are playing with
right?
worse decks than you were before.
It's like you were on a high before, and now you're just like, oh, this is my reality,
Yeah,
right?
because like what they
But
did is not that they brought decks back down to the level of KNC, but they made it worse than the level of KNC. Like overall, I don't know if that's their like intent or they just like fiddle with some numbers and this just happened to be the result. But that's where they're at, and I think it's fine. But like you can make it a little better than that, and I think the game will still be fine.
right, and you know what? At the end of the day, it's like this is just a result of them saying you guys wanted
Mm-hmm.
actual decisions,
Yeah,
and we gave it to you.
yeah,
And I'm
and
like, that is total. And at the end of the day, I'm all for it. And this is just me saying like. I understand why it makes some people feel bad because
mm-hmm.
I feel it too, right? It's like whenever you have those three choices between like really really good cards, right?
Steed,
Like
Vine Cleaver, Equality.
yeah, exactly. And even if I like, knock out the equality, I'm just like, oh, I have to give up the steed to take the vine cleaver. Or if I already have so many weapons, I'm like, I'm really not taking the vine cleaver here, right? It does feel pretty bad. And then whenever you have the bad picks, it's like
No, yeah,
it's
bad
so
picks are
bad. There's like no
awful.
redeeming that,
Yeah,
right? Like you're
yeah.
forced to pick a really, really bad card. So I think the overall feel, like after you draft, even though at the end your draft quality is the same, like the percent chance to get your draft quality is the same as before, you just feel worse throughout the process. So at the end, it just like it gives you a bad feeling to start off your
Mm-hmm.
arena run, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah, but like they can fix it again. Like all this problem goes away if Blizzard just says all decks are going to be within like a band of plus minus 15% total deck tier score, but by the end,
Yeah.
like because they obviously have a system to determine what their tier list is. So there you go. Everyone's going to be either exactly equal or like roughly equal, and then people will be like, well. I guess even if I'm picking a bad card now, it'll be made up for it later on in the draft or whatever, and you just wouldn't feel as bad. Like you would feel like you're actually on an even playing field in terms of your issue with that. Or they could just like ramp everything up a little bit. So again, what they've done is, and I've said this before, is like the top line items, like the best cards, are being offered to you right now about the same amount of times, or like the offering after accounting for the fact that you have to make choices between three really good cards. So the amount of times the top cards that are picked like a third of the time is going to end up in your deck. I don't know if I phrased that right, but you get the idea, right? Like after accounting for the fact you only pick one of three cards, the true
Right.
silvers that end up in your deck, the number of true silvers you see a paladin have is the same now as it was in KNC. That's what they've done. That's what the hotfix did. So now I think in their mind, that would bring the power level back to where KNC is, but in reality, because they're now actually forcing people to take bad cards sometimes, whereas people almost never had to, the power level has gone down overall. I think on average now, you're in like a bottom like 15 percentile deck pretty frequently compared to KNC. Like where the KNC deck would be 50 percentile, I think the average now is like bottom 15 or 20 percentile. It's a pretty noticeable difference. So one easy way to fix it is just to like raise the quality up a little, right? Or like if they have some kind of like equation to determine the percent chances of offering each bucket, to raise the middle buckets more and lower the like bad buckets, or like even raise the top buckets a little bit more and just say like, okay, we don't need to have the same amount of top cards as in the KNC meta. Maybe we can like go up 20% and that's still okay. Like if they want to do that, that would be like like a totally normal thing to do, and maybe that'll make things more exciting. For me personally, I think this meta is fine. I like this meta. I'm still trying to figure out the meta. I'm no expert in it. My runs are not going terribly well, but I have gotten to 12, and it definitely feels like your deck has a significant impact on how it's going. But it also feels like a lot of times when I lose, it's either to ridiculous RNG that the other person could not have planned for and whatever, right? It just happens. Or it's like a really, really close game that I know there was something I could have done earlier in the game that would have actually caused a different result. And whether it
Right.
would have been like, whether it was something that I could have logically foreseen and prevented or not, it was something that could have changed the course of the game, right? And sometimes just a misplay or whatever. In either case, it's like a lot easier to like analyze, and I feel more in control of the result. But it's definitely an adjustment. Like I'm definitely not playing at the top of my game right now.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's really nice to get all of these opinions, especially from someone like Kibler, right? Who is obviously a very good Hearthstone player, who doesn't play Arena that
Yeah.
much, but I think Kibler is someone who, because of just his overall experience with card games, right? Like when he talks about just sort of like his enjoyment of the game, even if I don't agree, it helps me sort of see the other side, right? And sort of like what he
You're treating
defines.
Kibler as like a really smart casual arena player.
Yeah, basically. Because I'll say this, like for a lot of, and this might sound weird, but I think you agree. When a lot
Uh-huh.
of people say they want something, I don't really trust them because I don't think they know what they want.
Yeah.
But for someone like
No, yeah.
Kibler,
Kibler knows
I know
what's good
he
for yeah.
exactly, yeah,
Mm.
exactly because of all of his
That's
experience.
interesting.
Yeah, so like
Kibler for the
even though
casual perspective.
well, for the actual knowledgeable
Right, right. Knowledgeable
casual
casual, yeah.
opinion,
Yeah.
right? And we're not saying casual because sometimes casual is construed as like bad as
No, yeah,
well.
no. Just
I
like
mean,
does not
Kibler
play
is
arena
obviously
as much.
really, really good
Yeah.
at the game.
Yeah.
It's just from someone who doesn't like who plays a
Mm-hmm.
lot of constructed and plays arena sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is really cool to get his opinion on that because people like Crip and Maz like play arena quite a lot,
Yeah.
right? Like Maz is basically just an arena player now. He like has been on the leaderboard multiple times. So I think that's pretty cool. Also, not to be sort of like forgotten is the fact that like Ixar popped into that Twitter sort of thread, right? And immediately sort of asked for feedback. He's like, okay, I understand you guys are concerned. Like, what do you not like about this specifically, right? Which I think is like definitely commendable. Like, it seems like Blizzard is really trying to identify like what people like and don't like, and trying to incorporate that as fast as possible, right? Like, is the meta right now perfect? No, and like it would be a miracle if they got it perfect after one change. But it does seem like they are trying to react as quick as possible and really elicit feedback. So definitely a good thing.
Okay, so here's a question that, I mean, we're not at that point yet, but what's Blizzard going to do with the new expansion and the rotation?
I have no idea.
They don't have any stats about that. Are they going to use their internal win rate stats for all these cards? How many rounds of Arena do they play internally when they're like, you know, doing this in the new release? I can't imagine they play that many to like gather actually a good sample size of stats on a purely internal Arena basis for the new for a new set.
Yeah, like, I don't know, and I'll say this because it's impossible for them to get it right. Yeah. Like, not because of anything. Like, it is just impossible for them to like get it right. So if you are trying to go for the leaderboard next month,
I mean, okay, one, it's not impossible for them to get it right. We basically get it right, and we have no internal testing. We like literally just run a formula.
There's always going to be opportunity for like arbitrage.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Opportunity for you if you're like going for the leaderboard to identify even just like 2 to 3 cards from a class and be like, wait, this is just wrong. Like, it's in the completely wrong bucket. And then if you identify, like, it's like, okay, in this class, this is totally in the wrong bucket. And if I just draft this, my deck quality is going to be way higher than their perceived average.
And,
right? Like,
and the way you do that is by looking at tier lists and win rates on HS Replay, depending on which one you identify with more. Like, we're still putting out the tier list. We have an actual algorithm that does this independent of win rates. It's just based on what the card actually does in the game. And it works pretty well, as you can tell from our tier list. It's not that it doesn't miss here or there, but as a general matter, it does quite well. And Blizzard doesn't have that. Blizzard's going off some combination of like win rates and pick rates and things like that, because their system is automated in that way. So when they're doing new cards, like, again, I have no idea. They can't put them all in one bucket, right? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
No, they can't.
So they have to, like, make some kind of determination of how good each of these cards are. And I can only imagine that they're doing it off of the, like, very minimal amount of internal testing and data that they've been able to gather with these, like, you know, internal Blizzard employees playing arenas against each other for, like, a few times and some testers, maybe.
So once again, this is another opportunity. It's like, okay, the beginning of every meta has always been a good opportunity to, like, identify like advantages that you can take, right? Because of microadjust, offering rates, whatever. But now there's especially a huge opportunity. And if you figure out first, and if you keep on spamming that, you are able to really get ahead.
Like, really get ahead. This upcoming, like, switch, because remember, it's even a rotation. They're going to get rid of so many old cards that they have data on, and they're going to add so many new cards that they have 0 data on. So I'm sure the first patch will come pretty quickly because they know it, right? Like, because they know they have this problem. So I don't think the advantage you'll get was going to last too long, but you'll get an advantage the first week or like half week or whatever, and that's gonna be pretty clutch. So yeah, do you want to do a question from the go before we do card good bad, or let's do question from the go to the end? Let's go to card good bad, because I'm trying to come out of this from the opposite perspective. And the opposite perspective is, well, right now, let's look at all the cards that Blizzard does have data on, right? Like, how many times have you offered a card and you're just like repeatedly in playing the arena and you're like, this card doesn't belong in this like group. I keep getting offered this card in this group, but it's like wrong. And one of the easiest ways to see that is by everybody picking that card. So Volcanosaur, the offering rates have skyrocketed since Blizzard went to 10.4. Why? Because Blizzard, for some reason, put it into a very, like, mediocre bucket. And everybody thinks Volcanosaur is actually a pretty dang good card, and our tier list has it as a 126, so we think it's like a low premium card as well. And so everybody picks Volcanosaur as long as you don't need a particular curve card or something. And that's why Volcanosaur offering rates or like pick rates are insanely high compared to where they were in KNC. And there's not much to learn from that besides why is Volcanosaur not winning games? Because presumably that's what Blizzard was basing it off of. Who knows? I don't think all the people's opinions plus our algorithm is wrong about Volcanosaur. In games, Volcanosaur seems like it makes a lot of impact. But yeah, maybe it makes less of an impact than we think. It's like something to consider. And that brings us to the card good bad that I have for today, which is Violet Teacher. Here's a card that changes a lot depending on the meta and depending on what your cards are. And our score right now is not a actual good score because 10.4 changed the amount of spells that are in each deck, and we don't have the data for that. So we're going off of KNC's rate of spells. So the real score for Violet Teacher should probably be lower than this. But Violet Teacher in neutral is rated a 124, and in Mage it goes up to a 138. And that's a really high score for what was normally, I think, like a card that you would think is like Yeti level or something, right? Like traditionally, and if you were to ask us this question about a year ago. And something I've noticed, though, is that Blizzard puts Violet Teacher pretty similar to where we have it. Which means Violet Teacher doesn't actually get taken too often. Because Blizzard seems to overrate Violet Teacher the same way we overrate Violet Teacher. And part of that, I think it's just that Violet Teacher must be winning a lot of games, or somehow their algorithm is making a determination that Violet Teacher is working. Now, again, like I said, I think we're overvaluing Violet Teacher because the number of spells that we have in the deck is based on 7.1 offering rates, which existed until like KNC even. So presumably, I want to say that the number of spells you see is going to be a little lower now because they took away the spell and weapon bonus. So it'll probably be a little bit lower than this, and we haven't adjusted to that yet. So our numbers are like a little bit off on the things that require spells. But still, it'll still end up being a card that's like Kooky Chemist level, like Dark Iron Dwarf level. And I know that Violet Teacher was treated in a similar way back in Classic. Right? Like, this was a premium card in Classic. And then somewhere between Classic and, like, the current meta, I think the opinion on Violet Teacher shifted. Like, 3/5s are not that good on the curve anymore. There's much more removals, so the chance that the Violet Teacher will stay up for a long time is greatly reduced. But the win rates now seem to be backing that up.
I think that's fair. Okay. Yeah, I definitely see about like 3/5s in general have not aged well at all, right? And they've, some stat distributions have sort of gotten worse and then gotten better, right? For example, 5/4s, right? When we sort of just like when Hearthstone just began, 5/4s were significantly worse than 4/5s. And then like slowly the 5/4s were seen like as good. And then I would say now it's like, it's pretty even. And sometimes I'd even prefer 5/4s, right?
Yeah. I usually prefer 5/4s over 3/5s. Our algorithm prefers 5/4s over 3/5s by a lot.
Yeah. And it's also partly why like Violet Teacher is not as good anymore, right? Because 3/5 just gets dominated by 5/4s.
Yeah. But the ability to like change spells and to have spells that generate spells, like that has definitely gone up. So its ability to kind of get a little out of control in like 1 or 2 turns has gone up.
Yep. So yeah, with Violet Teacher, I definitely do see that being offered in a bucket in which I'm just like, I don't want to take it, right? And this is something that I'll have to get used to. Like for quite a few picks, actually, one of the cards, I'm just like, wait, why are you here?
Yeah.
And maybe should open my eyes a little bit, right? Because I think for most of them, I'm correct, in which I'm just like, no, like I'm not picking you. But in some, it does make me think. I'm like, well, wait, okay, maybe I'm like just severely undervaluing this card.
Mm-hmm. And I will say this: Taro is in our chat right now. I have brought up a really good one. I have noticed this as well, so I'm going to bring this up too. And again, this card is not really about Violet Teacher. It's more about what you should be trying to notice right now to
Right,
make
right.
you like beat the drafting system that they've now implemented. So Taro, who's been like trying to chart this like which bucket each card goes into, says Bone Drake is only in the average bucket. And
Oh
that is
yeah,
definitely something that I've noticed as well, which is every time you see a Bone Drake, you're like, oh, yes, Bone Drake.
yeah. I remember when so Hafu and I, we sort of like we drafted 6 decks just to kind of get used to the drafting process, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember every single time we went or we saw a Bone Drake, it was like, oh okay,
Yeah,
like
obviously Bone
snap
Drake.
pick Bone Drake.
Yeah.
Because the other two choices were like so much
Yeah.
worse.
They were average cards, right? It's in the average bucket.
Yeah. Um it's weird. Like how anyways, I don't know.
And again, Bone Drake is not like a pro card. There's no like you would think that the average player would do about as well with a Bone Drake as a good player. Or I don't know, maybe the average player actually thinks it's a 6-drop, and then whenever they have it, they anti-tempo too hard.
Maybe. Maybe. I don't know. But it seems just way too good to be in the average, right?
Mm-hmm. Like regardless, right? Yeah.
Regardless, right?
Yeah. So these are things to look out for. If you play a lot of Arena, you start to build a little index in your head about what's overvalued and undervalued. And Blizzard's going to make all of that moot whenever they update the game, which who knows how frequently they're going to do that. It's a weird spot to be in right now as a hardcore Arena player, because I think there's no doubt that 10.4 has made the game a lot better. The draft like a lot better. And the gameplay, like, I think it's okay, but it hasn't. I'm not sure it actually made the gameplay itself better, but at least the draft is a lot better now. But at the same time, we have lost the ability to engage with the game at a high level to a significant degree, I think. And the ways you kind of combat it are a lot of it is up to you. There's no resources available now to do this, and to the extent that resources are available, who knows how quickly they become out of date in this situation, and who knows, like you would have to memorize a lot of things.
Yep.
Because it's not just like if someone gave you a list of cards that's in like the average bucket, or like a list of like cards that you may see a little bit more often, you still have to like play with it in your head in a way that in an actual in-game situation, that information would help you make your move. Like that's what's really hard about it.
Yep.
All right. Question from the GOAT. Let's end on the question from the GOAT.
Sure. Question from the GOAT. All right. We have the expansion coming up, right? And
Yes.
with this expansion, Blizzard is putting some cards into the Hall of Fame, right? So those cards will not be seen anymore. So one of them is Ice Block, right?
Mm-hmm.
We won't be seeing Ice Block anymore for Mage. We also won't be seeing Cold Light Oracle. Those are right. Now, my question is sort of, I mean, these are all like those two cards just don't matter in the arena, right? They basically don't matter. They're very low scores. They very rarely will swing a game. My question to you is sort of what neutral or class cards would you like to see being Hall of Famed for the arena? And these are
specifically in the arena.
Specifically in the arena, right? And remember that Hall of Fame cards are cards that are like from the classic set, right? Like they basically take cards from the classic set and they basically say, we don't want these to be in the classic set anymore. And I'll give you some time to think about it.
I don't need time, MCT.
Okay, that is one of them, right?
I think any arena player who's been playing since classic knows MCT was a problem from the very beginning. I would say limit design space, but they don't really design cards around arena. It just limits like meta space. Let's put it that way, and it creates these like totally unnecessary swings that does not make the game fun or like skillful or anything.
So here's the thing about MCT, right? And because like playing devil's advocate, you can always just say, okay, well, you get punished by MCT in the same way that you get punished by AoE, right?
No.
But that's not exactly true. Once again, I'm playing devil's advocate, and then I'm going to swing back, and then like,
Okay, okay. Swing back. Come on, come back to me.
right. So, okay, first of all, you can create, outside of like Psychic Scream or like Twisting Nether, right? A lot of AoEs you can just play around, right? Which MCT like doesn't like it, just regardless of the stat distribution, the stickiness of your minion, as long as you have 4, MCT works. And part of the issue with MCT, and as an infinite player, what you should really not want is like, if you know the AoEs, you can play around. Like a consistent result is good in your mind, right? Yeah. Like because it's a known. If you like, you know what is going to happen. So even if you think about Dragonfire Potion, if you know what's going to happen at the end, you can play around it. For MCT, and yes, there is always that risk reward of like playing the 4th minion, not playing the 4th minion, but you don't know sort of like at the end what will happen. And yes, there's that 25% chance it will take your biggest minion, like it takes the Sunwalker, but like that is something much harder to plan for, right? And if they take the Sunwalker, you lose. If they take the 1/1, you win. It's like, it's one of those things in which it makes your decision making as an infinite arena player much harder as a result because it is an unknown.
Yep. No, I mean it's a crappily designed card for the arena, and it's seen way too common in the arena, but not like so common that it's its own thing. Like if you always had to play around MCT, fine, then you just never play 4 minions. It's just kind of a rule of the game. If you're super desperate, you play more than 4 minions, but otherwise you don't. You can get screwed by this one card. But it's not seen that often. It's not seen anywhere near that often. So the correct answer is to almost never play around MCT, but then when they play MCT, you lose. Like half the time. The other half the time it's fine because they take your 1/1. Like that's just horrible for the game.
Right.
Like you don't have fun playing MCT, you don't have fun getting MCT, you don't have fun wondering about MCT, but you kind of have to, but it kind of doesn't matter. Like it's an awful spot right now. I would say MCT, even though it's much less of an issue now than it was in Classic, is in an even worse spot with regard to the meta and like how fun than in Classic. Because at least in Classic, you should worry about MCT in like maybe like 2% of your decisions. Now you should worry about MCT in like maybe 0.2% of your decisions, which actually makes it worse.
Yep. Okay, another card, not as egregious of a basically that doesn't sort of like tilt people as much as MCT, but I think another card that you can make an argument for is Knife Juggler. It's not as like the effect isn't as powerful, but this is also one of those things in which and I'm going to differentiate Knife Juggler with something like Mad Bomber, right? Like because you can also make a devil's advocate argument. It's like, oh, it's kind of the same thing as Mad Bomber. Mad Bomber can obviously hit your side of the board, right? And Mad Bomber is a 1-turn effect, right? It doesn't persist. With Knife Juggler, if you can't remove it, it just keeps on, persisting, right? And with Knife Juggler, it has like this really annoying synergy, especially if you like play Knife Juggler or Stand Against Darkness, right? And it's just another one of those cards that not only has like quite a large upside for its cost, it's got that really annoying RNG factor to it as well. So it's one of those cards in which, like I said, I don't. It's like, do I think it should be Hall of Famed like MCT should be Hall of Famed in Arena? No, it's got a much weaker case, but it's another card that I think is a candidate because of those reasons.
I don't know. I think after they nerfed MCT, it's like within. I don't like. Okay, I think RNG wise, Knife Juggler is less RNG overall than Mad Bomber, even though Mad Bomber just hits once. Like, I firmly believe that.
Right. It's the ceiling of Knife Juggler.
Right.
And a lot
of the ceiling takes many turns and combos to, like, pull off.
Right. But, like, once again, I agree. But I think with a lot of these cards, it's like you're afraid of that ceiling, right? It's like with MCT, it's like most of the time what you pull, even when it hits, is like...
Well, I mean, are you going to ban Alarmobot?
No, I mean, Alarmobot is just, like, really bad. Because even the ceiling is not good.
Okay, but I'm sure there are cards that are bad that have like really large ceilings that you don't want to happen, but like I don't know. I
And
don't
in
know
order
about
to
the
reach the
ceiling
actual true
argument.
ceiling of Alarmobot, you have to do like so much, right? It's like you have to draft something really big in addition to Alarmobot. You have to have it in your hand. The Alarmobot has to like not
Right.
die after you spend 3 mana to put out something with three. Like
Well,
it's
the knife juggler has to not die and has less health.
sure, but you can also protect that like I think much easier because you can put it out and also like start throwing knives, right?
That's true.
So yes, like Alarmobot has the highest. I'm trying to balance out sort of like ceiling with like actual obtainability.
All right. Okay,
um,
I can see that. I would be more like I think a lot of these are like if you look at what they're taking away from constructed, these are cards that are like seen in particular deck archetypes like all the time, right? Like they're trying to weaken mill. They're trying to for Molten Giant, I think they're getting rid of for like design space issues. They're trying to like make Frost Mage be a little more honest than this like blanket like oh can't be killed kind of like things.
right.
So in Arena, like those aren't actual considerations because you're not. There's no deck that like survives on any particular like archetype from just one card.
Right, exactly. So I'm trying to
So
find
it's not, yeah. So what you normally would take away then, or I don't even know, like it would be like cards that are just like too powerful and flexible and like will go in everything. Maybe I don't know. I
right.
don't see. It's just not a lot of like problems that I really see.
I had one last card that I think should be considered. And you know, we don't talk about legendaries that often, right? But I think this card, and it's actually not Deathwing.
I was gonna say Deathwing's fine. It's
Deathwing's fine.
powerful, but it has enough drawbacks.
I was gonna say the Black Knight. That is a card in
Huh.
which I think from a design, it's like does it offer any sort of unique design? It doesn't, right? I look at a card, I'm like, what does it add versus what does it sort of like take away, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a card that is just like really all or nothing and it
Mm-hmm.
really game winning. And the drawback is like,
Well, then why not like Barnes?
because Barnes in Arena is not problematic, you know? In constructed, it is really problematic. In Barnes, your chance, once again, it is like chance to hit as well, right? Like, what are you pulling out from Barnes in Arena?
I don't know. Possibly something really good.
Possibly something really good, but most of like the vast majority of time, Barnes in Arena sucks, right?
Mm-hmm.
But with Black Knight, it's like how many Bog Creepers do you see? How many like Cyclotrons do you see? How many?
When you have the Black Knight in your hand, very rarely. When you
Yeah, I
don't
mean, you
have
can
the
also
Black
just
Knight in
hold
your
on to
hand,
it for a
all the
couple of
time.
turns. Like, and we even have more taunts now, like
Uh-huh.
Mastodon. We have Sleepy Dragons. Once again, this is like one of those cards in which I look at the actual obtainable potential ceiling of a card, and
Okay.
then I look at sort of like does it actually like does it add something, right? Because if it actually adds something, it adds skill versus sort of like the ceiling, like a Defile, right? Defile, it like adds a lot, I think, to skill, to these situational plays, and the ceiling is like really, really high. But
Yeah.
you know, it has this like skill factor to it. With Black Knight, it's just sort of like I don't see what it really adds, but I think it takes away so much, like just because of the huge swing potential.
No,
So
that's true.
well, yeah, so that's another card in which, once again, look, I'm not saying like this needs to happen, you know, like I'm in an uproar about this, but if we are asking the question, what
Like it just
cards?
makes Arena less fun and less skill
Yeah,
for no
exactly,
whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Like
it. That's it.
because it's like it's a like you have Vilespine and it's a card, but like the fact that Vilespine's way overpowered actually kind of makes it more acceptable than Black Knight by your way of looking at it, because the swings are less like random based on whether you happen to have a large taunt or not. It's like
Right,
guaranteed to remove a big minion because you're gonna play a big minion at some point.
right. It's like the limitation on Black Knight makes it even more
Yeah,
frustrating.
yeah. No, I
Right.
see what you mean. I don't agree with it. I would still take out Vilespine over Black Knight any day of the week,
Well,
but
once again, this is not about power, and I'm trying to target sort of more neutral stuff, right?
No, no, I
Like,
know. I
yeah,
understand the applicability, but in terms of whether it's problematic for the arena, like I see where you're coming from. I don't agree that removing these cards is really like a thing because its impact in the arena is so small, and that other normal cards that we all accept like have much larger impact and a much wider variety just based on power level, right? Like even if
oh
it's
yeah,
more
yeah.
like quote unquote fair and expected.
I mean, what's more like problematic, quote unquote, like Bone Mare or Black Knight, right? Definitely Bone Mare. Like it depends on how you define problematic, but the Black Knight, and once again, it just fills this sort of like annoying kind of like swing
Yeah.
that I don't like about the card.
Yeah.
So
Okay. Well, that's a question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. And that's it from us here today. We'll be back next week, and there will be a lot of new cards to talk about. Hopefully some exciting ones with arena implications. There's been a couple cards revealed this week as well, like literally 2 cards, I think. And we're not talking about it here. We'll talk about those with next week's Lightforge as well. So next week's going to be really exciting as we move on into Witchwood and kind of leave 10.4 behind. See you guys then. Until next week, this is ADWCTA.
this is Merps. Good luck in the arena.
Boop. All right, we're good. There's no real. I'm using the Arena Coop screen, but there's not actually going to be an Arena Coop, right, Merps? Or are you good?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I'm gonna be working from now until like forever.
Oh